All right, Joe, here you are. You are now the host, and you should be able to share your screen. So.
Okay. Okay, good morning, everyone. I've been studying soil health now for about the past 15 years. It's been kind of a journey for me. It's my passion in gardening is building soil health. I think it's very important to maintain our ecosystem, everything. Now, I did not start off wanting to learn about soil health. I actually started off wanting to know what was there to organic gardening. Was it simply just following the list of approved products, or was there more? And after a lot of reading and attending soil health conferences and talking and listening to agronomists, I realized that gardening and agriculture should be viewed more holistically. My garden and I are part of a living, functioning ecosystem that provides a healthy environment for all of us. So we have healthy plants and animals to eat and a healthy place for us to live and breathe. The things I'm going to talk about, I have been practicing in my own garden, all of them, for the last 6 years. I have been using some of them up to 10 years. So this is something I've been doing, not just talking about doing. What I'm going to cover is I'm going to define soil health for you. I'm going to tell you how to determine the health of your soil and how to build soil health. The definition that I use for soil health is the one that's used by the NRCS, and there are various versions of this, and also you'll find in textbooks describing soil health. And you can see it described as a soil with a continued capacity to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. Very simple thing. And probably the easiest way to kind of visualize what's really going on is look at the soil food web. You see those functions that it talks about are the carbon cycle, the nutrient cycle, the biocommunity cycle, and the water cycle. And the soil food web kind of highlights those. You can see up there in the top corner, the sun. Plants are taking the energy from the sun, using it to combine carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, nutrients and moisture from the soil to produce carbohydrates. It then shares these sugars with the biology in the rhizosphere. That's the area around the root of that plant you see in the soil food web. It's also using some of those sugars for nectar to attract pollinators to the plant.
Joe, are you to the point where you want to be sharing your PowerPoint yet, or are you just doing your introduction?
Oh, I want to be showing my PowerPoint.
Oh, okay. Thank you, everyone who was suggesting that. All right. So that share screen, the green button in the center of your screen, you should be able to pull up your PowerPoint. Y'all, that's my fault. He had it all ready to go, and I told him I want to share my screen and show y'all how to chat. So.
Well, okay, let me go back to the slide or two here. Okay.
I was just having a full-blown introduction there. I didn't know we were missing slides.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. Here's my entry.
They were really worried about all the notes they were going to have to take now. Okay.
Yeah.
So, Joe, that share screen is in the middle of your Zoom screen.
What did I do wrong that I don't have that? Let's see here. I was set up at one point here and now.
I know, that one was my fault. I'm sorry.
Okay, all right. Let's see.
So on your actual Zoom screen, not your PowerPoint screen.
Careful. Yeah, there we go.
Screen. Mm-hmm.
That's what.
Then your PowerPoint should be up in that grouping on there.
Yes, it is.
Beautiful.
My fault, everyone.
Hey, this is we're all learning today, I imagine. So. Thanks, Joe.
There we go. All right, now. Okay, now I can see what I need to see on my computer. And everyone can see my slides now? Okay. All right. Well, you've heard my introduction. What I'm going to talk about, I told you before, is this is all stuff that I am actually doing in my garden and have been doing, like I said, all of it for at least the last 6 years and some of it for the past 10 years. But I've been studying this subject for the last 15 years. And what I'm going to cover is I'm going to define soil health for you, determine the health, tell you how to determine the health of your soil and how to build a healthy soil. Okay, we'll get back here. All right, and a soil health is defined as a continued capacity to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants and animals. The key thing here is talk about the functions. Those functions are the carbon cycle, the bio-community cycle, the nutrient cycle, and the water cycle. As so the soil food web is probably the easy way to visualize that. And the carbon cycle starts off with the plants who photosynthesis, taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Now, it's sharing it with the life in the fungi and the bacteria in the soil. And then they, of course, are through their respirations are sending it back to the atmosphere. But they're not sending all of that carbon back to the atmosphere. Some of that is being sequestered in the soil. The bio-community cycle, one form is they're consuming each other and then eventually dying, and then their bodies and their waste is becoming part of the nutrient cycle. And the water cycle, of course, is all things, plants and animals live and breathe, the respirations are giving off carbon dioxide and water. Water falls to the ground, of course, and then it's picked back up. Falls to the ground, the animals consume it, and then the respirations turn it back over to the animals. I guess one key thing I mentioned on the carbon cycle, plants are making so much of their own, or converting so much carbon to carbohydrates that they actually, in different plants, are sharing somewhere between 20 and 60% of the carbohydrates that they make with their community. They're either giving it to the life and the biology in the soil or in nectar, along with supplying the plant with the nutrition that it needs. So how do you determine the health of your soil? That's what it starts with, just getting out there with a shovel. You dig in, take a scoop of soil. And the first thing you might want to do is smell it. Just grab a hold of a handful of that soil and bring it up and take a whiff of it. If it has a nice sweet, that earthy smell that we've all come accustomed to smelling, then that's a good indicator your soil is doing well. If it has kind of a rotten egg smell, that tends to mean that maybe it's kind of anaerobic or there's something going wrong and your soil is not functioning properly. The color is another good indication of the health of your soil. Nice dark brown, like you can see in that sample, and that's a shovel full of soil out of in my garden. Has a nice dark brown look, then that's telling you that there's a high organic matter and everything in there. And if you dug down in some of the clay soils east of I-35, you might have seen, if you dug deep enough, some gray clay. That was clay that was not getting enough oxygen and actually had kind of gone anaerobic. The key thing to also help is the soil aggregation. And by soil aggregates, we're talking about those clumps of soil particles, minerals, organic matter that are all kind of formed together, like granola kind of affect look. And they're held together by glues that are natural glues that are produced by the bacteria and the fungi. They have some fancy names, but you know, unless you're a scientist, that's really not that important to the average person to know the exact names. Now, what I like to use is my display here, mason jars full of corn products to kind of help you understand soil aggregation. The first jar there on the left is cornmeal. And that would be like soil that had been heavily tilled or rototillered. You know, lots of gardeners like that, like nice fluffy soil. Well, that's, if you think about that cornmeal, when you add moisture, water or milk to it, it's going to sit on the top and pool. So that wouldn't really be what you truly want in your garden. You don't want the water to pool or puddle on top. You want it to infiltrate. That also kind of seals off the surface so that aggregation, or so that the gas exchange between the atmosphere and the soil doesn't take place. The second one, cornflakes, would be more like clay particles. Flat particles, you can see when they're dry, just like those cornflakes, they're air spaces, and those air spaces are very important in the soil. That's where the moisture infiltrates, that's where the gas exchange takes place, that's where roots grow, that's where worms live. And so aggregation is very important, those air spaces. And just like those cornflakes, when clay particles get wet, they're going to pack down and form just kind of a seal off the soil. So clay part, that's why, you know, when you have a heavy rain in clay soil, it seals off and the moisture really doesn't go down that deep a lot of times and just starts running off. The second product there, or the third product, commonly known as kicks, would be more stable soil aggregates. As you can see, they have good spaces there between the soil particles. And just like the kick cereal, when you add milk or moisture to them, they maintain their shape for a considerable amount of time, holding their moisture. And that would be soil that probably has not been tilled in 3 or 4 years. You might look at soil like this if you want to kind of see some of that soil in your own yard. Go out near your property line, an area where you really have not disturbed it very much, and you'll probably see a difference in the aggregation of that soil than in your garden or somewhere else that you may have been heavily tilling. And of course, the whole kernels of corn, they represent soil out in the prairie, soil that has probably never been tilled or been undisturbed, just had living plants in it all the time for, you know, many years, undisturbed soil. And just like those kernels of corn, when they get wet, they're not going to easily degrade or flatten out and fill in their spaces with anything other than moisture passing through. Which gets us to how stable are those aggregates? One way to do that is to do a soil stability aggregation test, or one of the comments is a slate test. And that's what you can see in this picture I have demonstrated. This is a several-year-old picture, but anyway, it shows on my right in the picture there, my right, that's soil from my garden. The soil on the other side is that soil you get at a garden center, usually under $2. They call it garden soil. Sometimes they call it sandy loam. And you put them in a little cylinder like I have here. And if you want to do all this, you could do it on your own, but it's just as easy to put some water in a glass and then just drop a clump of dry soil down in there and it'll disintegrate there. But this is more dramatic when you're trying to do it in front of a group and show aggregate stability test. That's simply a simple cylinder, you know, a spaghetti cylinder or something. I don't remember where I got it, Walmart or somewhere, and then a little wire basket made out of some 1/2 inch fabric. But you put your sample of soil in it, fill it with water, your clump of soil in that little basket, and if it has good aggregation, it's going to stay there for quite a while. My garden soil that I did in my presentations will actually still have that shape of that ball of soil by the end of the presentation, my presentation hour, maybe or longer after I placed it in the water. That one on my left in the picture there, the garden soil, that tends to disappear within 5 minutes. It is all, that clump is just disintegrated and soaked to the bottom. And what that means is that it's been so, so has been so mechanically worked and pulverized that all the glues that held those aggregates together are broken down. The next thing I do is do an infiltration test. And that's kind of hard to describe, but the best, if you're really interested in doing a infiltration test on your soil, if you go to the NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Services website, and just do a search for soil quality test, it'll tell you how to do it. And one of the things it tells you to do is get a 6-inch cylinder. Well, that can be kind of difficult until you realize that a 3-pound coffee can is a 6-inch cylinder. And you see, I have that line on, it'll tell you pound it in the ground about 3 inches, and then you're going to pour 444 milliliters of water into there. And if you're not metric, that's about 2 cups of water. And then you would time how long it takes to infiltrate. But it goes into great detail telling you how to, well, not really, fairly easy description. There's a little PDF file to tell you how to do an infiltration test. But that would represent 1 inch of rain. And 1 inch of rain should soak in well within a couple of minutes in your soil. If it's not, then you have an indication that you need to do something to work on the health of your soil. So why do you want to build a healthy soil? That's probably where the first question I'm telling you how to build is, why do you want to? You want to create the most favorable habitat possible for that soil food web. You want those microbes to be working 24/7 because they're what's going to build the aggregation. Not all of the supplements that you're going to add to your garden soil, but it's actually the biology in the soils what's going to make those aggregates. Those glues and are going to start sticking things together, holding things up. The bacteria and the fungi will glue those things together because they're going to try to create their own, build their own home down there so they can breathe well and get plenty of moisture and have that plant thrive so they have lots of sugar. So how do you actually do it? There are 4 simple steps, and it does not matter if you're living in Central Texas, North Dakota, Maine, or wherever. Anywhere you're going to go from now on, if you follow these 4 simple principles, you're going to be able to build healthy soil. And now I'm going to go into each one of them as we go along here. The first one is to minimize soil disturbance. And the types of disturbance that we're talking about are physical disturbance, chemical disturbance, and biological disturbance of the soils. And the big one, this is a local field. I'm going to embarrass any local farmers as to whose field that is, but that is a local field somewhere in Hayes, Guadalupe, and Comal County. It's in that area. I think I could still pick it out, but I'm not going to. You can see there. This is a field that has been heavily tilled, and we see this all the time. You pass out. How many times you see a farmer go over that field with his disc harrow breaking up that soil? This is a result after a heavy rain when you've busted up those aggregates. You can see an area down through the middle where it is just collapsed. The aggregates collapsed. You ended up with a smooth surface. You can even see some signs of some erosion there. We do the same things in our garden. If you're over rototilling your soil on your garden on a regular basis, if you're even out there spading it, you're breaking up those soil aggregates, the very important part of getting the healthy soil. The next thing is chemical, heavy use of fertilizers and pesticides. And the fertilizer, we're not only talking about chemical and synthetic fertilizers, but also organic fertilizers. It's kind of like trying to, as a human, trying to live on vitamins and Snickers bars. you're getting your carbohydrates, you're getting all the appropriate minerals supposedly, but that's still not as healthy as trying to get that through the food you're taking in and the biology in your stomach, extracting those nutrients for your body. And there's a very close, the more I have studied, the more I realize there's a great similarity between our digestive tract and our soil. They both kind of evolved in the same world. So fertilize, pesticides then, that's of course herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides. It's very hard to use any one of those pesticides without having collateral damage of getting something else. If you're going after that insect, you're probably going to get ones that were beneficial to your garden also. If you're going after powder mildew or wilt in some vegetable you had in your garden, you're probably going to damage mycorrhizal fungi and other very beneficial fungi in your garden soil. The biological disturbance is overgrazing. And I know you're all thinking right now, Joe, I don't graze livestock in my front yard. You do the same equivalent thing every time you go out there and just mow it down tight, trying to get that putting green lawn. Unless you have a grass that was specifically designed for that, and even then continue just really short mowing, it's not going to do that. What you're doing is you're removing armor from the soil. You're making it easy so we do have a heavy rain for it to wash away the soil when it's hot out there, to overheat the soil, because once that soil temperature gets above about 105, the soil bacteria, fungi and bacteria start degrading. They either go dormant or just plain die. That's why I want to minimize that disturbance. The next one there, using plants to add diversity to the soil. Most gardeners have heard about the three sisters. You know, folklore tells us that the Native Americans taught European settlers to plant that combination of corns, beans, and squash because they benefited each other. What they were probably really benefiting with that combination was the life in the soil by adding that diversity. With the corn, that's a grass, and grasses are one of the primary hosts of mycorrhizal fungi, which has gained a lot of interest of people in the last few years, even though Sir Albert Howard discovered it well over 100 years ago. Beans are a legume, and of course we know them with their symbiosis with rhizobium bacteria, remove nitrogen from the air and then convert it and put it in little nodules on the roots of the legume. Without that legume, it's not going to have that rhizobium bacteria is not going to be able to function or really thrive. So you need to have a legume in your soil on a regular basis. Squash is, its prime purpose is just plain a broad leaf. It shades soil, has big tap roots to go down and break up the soil. So it's a polyculture, I guess is what I'm writing that, and not a monoculture. If you're planting a monoculture, then that gets you into the thing that you need to start looking at. If you're not already doing, you're planting monocultures, is crop rotation. You've got to get that plant back in that soil within a reasonable amount, within a year or two, for that bacteria or fungi to thrive that's been living in a relationship with that particular plant. So if you plant the polycultures, they're always going to be there and always active. And if we're trying to build healthy soil, we want that soil food web to be running at full throttle almost the entire year. And that's very easy with our climate here in Central Texas to garden and to keep it going year round. Some plants, I talk a little bit about mycorrhizal fungi, don't have relationships with mycorrhizal fungi. And that's the brassicas. And you can see a picture of kale there on the left and then a broccoli. But you can see what I've had in plant. And this is pictures out of my garden. there's some ryegrass, some fava beans, a little bit of vetch. I see maybe a daikon radish in there with the kale plant. And then with the broccoli, you can see just above the head of the broccoli, there's a sprig of vetch, which is a legume. And then up forward in that picture of the broccoli is a fava bean, which is another legume. And you can see things. So, see, actually kind of practice, and it really does work. Of course, you can't have one that's so large that it's, you have to pay attention a little bit to height, so when you're planting in there in your mixture. Now, the next says maintaining that living root throughout the year, which means minimizing fallow periods. Don't leave if you're not going to garden because in the summer because you're leaving to go on an extended vacation, don't leave your soil bare. Plant some black-eyed peas, some okra, some Sudan grass. Plant something in there and just let it go. When it comes back, you can go in there with your mower and mow it if that's what it takes. But minimize those plants. The only somewhat fallow period you should have would possibly is you cleared out one crop and the next one still hasn't sprouted and came up. The easy way to do it, and another way to build your soil, is to use cover crops to fill those kind of voids. I have a cover crop going somewhere in my garden all the time. I don't leave any voids between rows, between plants. I try to cram as many different plants in there. And I plant mixtures. And the mixtures that you want to look at are the plants from these types of groups: cereals, grasses, legumes, brassicas, and cenopods. And here's some examples of those plants. And as you can see, in just about all those groups, there's something that you can eat. You don't have to devote your garden plot to unedible things. You can plant things in there, get it, a cover crop in there, and just go out and I just go out and broadcast them in and not worry about those neat little rows. And I'm still able to harvest things out of those soils. The one thing that you got to get caution of is if you're putting down there in radish, if you're planting daikon radish as part of your things, which is a great root crop, if you've never planted a daikon radish, I've actually had some about 2 feet long growing in my garden in the winter. They have a lot of foliage and they're going to shade out things. So it's hard to get a broccoli or something out, or winter peas or something to grow in your garden if you're planting your radish. So do pay attention to how thick or heavy you are planting them. Rye sometimes can take over everything. So you might want to let, if you're going to plant some spinach in there as one of your fall cover crops, let it get a start before you put something like rye or barley or oats in there, because it can take over and kind of hide it. Of course, the vetches and clover and summer hemp are good nitrogen producers, but the vetch, you could plant that in the fall and it would do okay, but most of those are going to do well in the spring. I do have a little bit of alfalfa as a cover crop growing in my garden all the time. I usually end up planting something else that kind of inhibits it a little bit, but that's a big, has large roots that can go down 25 feet if you have it soil that deep enough. I don't know where that is. It's not in my garden, but they have large roots that can go down and kind of mine those minerals and bring them to the surface. And of course, the thing that comes up with cover crops, if you're planting all these cover crops, how do you terminate them? I terminate, mine by the knockdown and crimp method. As you can see a picture, that's what I call my crop circle board. For those of you that may be familiar with, heard of the crop circles in England back in the early 90s, they determined some guys are going out making those geometric patterns by just a simple board there with a piece of angle iron across the middle of it. And the picture on the right, you can see me kind of use and demonstrate how to use that board. That works good for fine open areas, but I kind of got involved that in the way I'm cover cropping now, I don't use it that much. What I've actually went to is a modified version. I took your average 8-inch camper and I've connected a piece of angle iron to the bottom of it. And you can go around and knock them down. And the beauty of that versus the crop circle board there is that you can kind of spin it as you're dropping it and get it more of an uneven pattern, which is what we're really kind of doing is what a lot of farmers and ranchers that are really practicing no-till cover crops are utilizing no-till and cover crops. They'll send animals in there to graze on them, and they stomp that crop into the ground a little bit because they're stocking them so heavy that they are not consuming all of it, but they're actually, you know, dropping the manure and just beating some of the plant down in the ground. And that's kind of what that's almost duplicating a little bit. Others like to mow. You know, some people want to mow them down first and then plant through them. You can also pull them, your cover crops, but it's easier for me to just knock it down. So you can choose, either one's acceptable practice, but do not terminate your cover crops by tilling them into the soil. When you till your cover crop into the soil, you defeated principle number one. You did not minimize disturbance to the soil. You can plant easily right through those cover crops. And I'm going to show you a picture coming up here. My next area here is keeping that soil covered as much as possible. And my favorite way is just plant some, keep living plants. That's the best way to keep soil covered. This is actually, those squash are actually planted in a bed that I had rye in. And you can see some of the rye that came up that it didn't all get terminated, but I simply tamped it down with my crop circle board and then cut little holes and put my transplants into it. And here you can see some of that, what an area looks like after you went through with something like my tamp method to knock it down. And of course, that crop residue, be it a cover crop or your crop you just harvested, put that plant residue back on the soil or never even remove it from the soil. I go in and simply tamp down my crops that I can. Some things like corn and okra, though, I do have to go in there and I take just a big pair of loppers and cut them off and lay them right back down. But that crop residue is a cover. You've mulched and you've not had to break the wheelbarrow out to haul mulch into your garden, which is a good time saver and back saver. Of course, another way to do that is get mulch. And we're very fortunate that we have the Comal County Recycle Center just down the road where you can go get a load of mulch. And there I am picking up a load of wood chips. Wood chips are an acceptable mulch to use in your garden. Just do not put on a layer much thicker than 2 inches at the absolute, but I would try to keep it down to about 1 inch. When you start adding things like wood chips to your garden, you're actually kind of building that thatched roof over that English cottage. So when we do get our small rains, the rain is not going to infiltrate into the soil. So you want to have something that's more permeable to your soil, or to allow the moisture to get down in and to touch your soil. Straw is another one. That's a good mulch. The problem is that straw is pretty expensive in our area. If you were in some of the areas where they were actually baling the straw after they harvested their wheat, it might be a little cheaper. In our area, it's pretty heavy, and majority of the farmers now don't remove that straw. They leave it right there to crop residue to build their soils. Hay zone, but you can bring reeds. So kind of what I've covered here, and I've kind of given you probably some that needs a couple, 3 hours. I'm trying to get it here in a reasonable amount of time and still leave you some time to ask some questions and things. We talked about defining the health of soil, determine how to the health of your soil, and then how to build soil. Last thing here is, so I do a lot of reading. This is just a sample of some of the reading and things that I've looked at. And you see there's some books there that bring health and our health into it, which I think is a very consideration. You can eat anything that you buy at the grocery store and get good healthy food that's going to maintain your life. But to really get the biology and everything that your soil needs, you need to be eating plants that are growing in soil that is healthy, or that relationship with the biology and the plant and the soil is well maintained, so that you're getting the appropriate things to feed your gut appropriately. There also some of that top right one is a book by Sir Albert Howard that said he was with the Agriculture, British Agriculture Ministry of Agriculture about 100 years ago, and he writes there and talks about things that he was studying in India. And then the one below, it's another one of his books. Dirt is one of the Erosion of Society. If you just want a book to read that'll kind of tell you the story, and Dr. Montgomery puts forward the idea that no civilization has been destroyed by wars. They've all been destroyed because they destroyed their soil. The bottom left one there, 40 centuries of farming, or farmers of 40 centuries, is by King. He was with the USDA. He went to Japan, Korea, and China about 100 years ago, because even then we knew that our soils were being deteriorated to the point that of no return. And he wanted to know what they were doing different, because unlike North America, where they had no westward movement when they destroyed their soils to go find new soils to farm. They've stayed in place and farmed. And he wanted to study their practices and everything as to how they were doing that. And even though a very old book, and it's just about his description, you can learn a lot in there about just plain natural farming. Middle one on the bottom is One Straw Revolution, written by a Japanese gentleman that I cannot pronounce his name. I'm sorry. Fukuwa or something like that. I do a horrible job of pronouncing it. The One Straw Revolution. He was with the Japanese Ministry of Agriculture in late 20s, early 30s, and abandoned that when he went to the hospital sick from all the chemicals, because at that time they were trying to adapt American ideas about agriculture and putting all these synthetic supplements in the soil. And he became sick and went on to be one of the leaders in kind of the permaculture movement. I guess I'm open out for any questions that you may have. And
Joe, we did have a few questions as you were teaching.
mm-hmm.
Okay, so the first one was, how deep do you need to till a garden bed?
Never.
Never. And I'm thinking that was before you got to the never part. Okay.
Yeah, you should never do it. What you're doing is, when you till your garden soil, that's kind of like going out and turning your compost pile. You turn your compost pile to stimulate that biology to break down that organic matter. We're trying to put organic matter in the soil, not remove it. And when you start breaking up your garden soil, you're breaking up those aggregates, which are held by those ooze. That's a sugar rush. Bacteria and fungi in your soil just go crazy and start eating up that organic matter in your soil. Most farm soils right now are down in the 2 and 3% organic matter. 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, probably 150 years ago, they were probably all somewhere about 8, 9, 10% organic matter.
Joe, the next question was in regards to squash. So I think they said they usually plant squash. It looks good for a while, and then worms start eating the stalks every year.
Ooh.
Oh.
I don't know of a permanent way. There's a lot of belief that that's because we've killed off their natural predators. I don't have, look at some of the other varieties of squash that have smaller, that tends to be the zucchini and the large stem squash. The method I've tried in my garden this spring, I planted my squash already, mowed transplants out in my garden. I've covered them with the thinnest row cover I could get, which was about a 10, I believe it was. That basically is only there to keep out insects. So I put them in the ground, got a little tent over the top of them, and see if I can't keep them covered up until they get almost ready to start, blooming. And of course, have to uncover them to allow the pollinators to come in. But until that point, I'm hoping that I've kept out the moth that's going to lay the eggs and then thus produce that worm that gets it to the vines and everything.
Awesome. So the next one is, what is the metal piece on the crop circle for? They're not totally understanding how to use the board.
The board, yeah, that you're seeing the bottom side of that board, and that piece of angle iron goes across there to put a little break in it. You don't want, when you're knocking down and using it, terminate your cover crops the way I do, you don't want to cut it up into pieces. You just want to kind of put a crimp in there so that the plant will dry out and help it to die and turn more to mulch for you sooner, versus pulling them up. And that method works best. You need to let your covers get up to maybe about 50, 60% in bloom, and they'll terminate much easier. If you try terminating, say, rye even, before it starts to bloom, it's going to grow right back as a grass. Even if you go in there and mow it, you can't. It's very hard to kill short of just going out there with a herbicide. But if you let it get up there where it's sending up that bloom, that seed pod looking thing, then it will terminate fairly easily usually.
Okay, the next one is, what are the impacts on water usage if you have your veggies planted in the midst of cover crops?
I don't find that it takes any more water to water my garden. I have migrated away from using drip lines and moved more of kind of overhead misting. I think maybe back in that one slide there that showed the, let's see if I can go back to it here. The very beginning one there was different plants. Yeah, you can see those hoops in there and then the lines. I've put micro sprinklers in there, and that's primarily how I water my garden. See the hoops with a PVC line running down? Each of those PVC lines, about every 3 feet, is a little micro sprinkler. And I find that I really don't use any more water than doing that method that I did before. And some of it too, I went to that, so I found when I broadcast, you can't broadcast seed and get it watered enough using a drip line unless you're just following that drip line. So that was another reason why I chose to go to that, was my irrigation method.
Awesome. All right, another question. What about adding compost to the soil for small gardens? They may have missed that, they said, though, so sorry.
I look at compost as an inoculant. I don't add supplements to my soil. My supplement to my soil is organic matter, is dead plants or living plants. Living plants preferred, but putting your crop residue back down there, it's making the biology in the soil work to release those nutrients in your soil. And compost is another one that's like constantly, eating that Snickers bar. You're getting it already pre-digested. I want the bacteria in my soil to digest it. So I'm doing more of a composting in place. If you're starting a brand new bed, yes, you should add some compost, but I still would not add more than 1 inch, probably. Yeah, 1 inch is really, because treat it more like an inoculant to get the whole process started in your garden. Unless you just did something that you've just totally destroyed it. There is no need to put inches of compost on your garden plot every year.
This was more of just a comment, which I appreciate. There are good book resources at the library. Thank you. There's also a new book published this year that is Grow Your Soil by Diane Messler, Miessler. So that's just something somebody suggested. And that's the end of our chat questions. If anybody wants to ask Joe a question just directly, you can always unmute yourself and ask, or just chat another question, either way.
Yeah. Oh, I've added to if you're really interested in learning a lot more about soil health, there are a lot of good resources on the NRCS website, and just do a search for soil health and you'll be inundated with it. There are a lot of good YouTube videos put out by the NRCS that talk about building soil health. Now, they're primarily geared to ranchers, and I probably most of my focusing on it from ranchers and farmers' point of view, kind of because I wanted to know what people were trying to make a living off of were doing. I didn't want to know what someone that had a deep enough wallet could go down to a garden center and buy the garden. I wanted to know how to do it, that if you had to make a living in doing it, and you know, you couldn't just go buy everything that you needed to do it. You had to do it more in place. So that's kind of where my focus went with the farming aspect of it.
Joe, one other question. How do you keep airspace without tilling?
The biology in the soil will do that. Once you build that soil aggregation, it's going to have all the soil it needs. Believe it or not, your soil won't need to be soft by mechanical means. I can go out in my garden plot anywhere with my bare hand, not even a glove, and paw down through to put a transplant into the ground. I can't quite get down to my bedrock, but I can get pretty close. Remember, air is bad. That's like the turning your compost pile.
All right. In the chat, I'm about to put in where y'all can find this recording. It'll be on our library's website. You can go to r@comalmg.org, and I believe that's y'all's Master Gardener website, correct, Joe? So
yes.
I think there's a lot of good resources on there as well. So I just sent that in the chat to everyone.
Okay.
All right. Oh, any other questions? Or Joe, do you have anything else you want to share?
No, I guess, no.
All right. Hey, I think for our first Zoom meeting on here, that was pretty successful. So thank you, Joe, for being brave and getting on and teaching in a new format.
All right, you're welcome.
All right. I guess that is it for today, and we appreciate everybody's attendance and kindness on the technical issues and all of that. But thank you a lot, Joe. I learned a lot, I know, and I'm sure everybody else did too. So. Okay. All right. Oh, somebody said thank you, Joe. That was great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. A lot of thank yous, Joe. So we appreciate you. All right, y'all. The only thing I have left is Troy from the Comal County Extension Office is going to be teaching a class on rain gardens Wednesday at 12 noon. You can sign up for that at our library's calendar, just like you did this one. And yeah, I think that's it. But anyway, thank you, Joe. We appreciate you.
You're welcome.
All right, y'all.
A learning experience for me.
Hey, I know you're ahead of the curve on this learning experience. So here we go. All right, thank y'all.
Bye.